Welcome to Ask the Church, our video series where we seek to answer your questions about church worship, practice, or theology in under 5 minutes. Today's question, by the way, will definitely stretch that 5-minute mark. The question is, what do Anglicans believe about Mary? And I want to answer this question by sort of parsing it into 3 separate questions. What must Anglicans believe about Mary? What can Anglicans believe about Mary? And what don't Anglicans believe about Mary? Before we plunge into those, just as an aside at the beginning, I want to say that Anglicans, like many Protestants, don't think about Mary enough, and we don't think about Mary highly enough. Mary was chosen by God for the highest honor that a human has ever been given. She was favored by God. She was chosen to bear in her womb, to give birth to, and to be the mother of the Son of God himself. No other human has that place. We ought to think highly of her because God thought highly of her. We also ought to think highly of her because she demonstrates for us what sainthood looks like. We see in Mary complete submission to the will of God, even when she didn't understand. Complete submission, even when it cost her her freedom and her reputation. Complete submission, very simply because she was willing to offer herself to God. She is the prototype of a saint. Even in the way that she dealt with things that were perplexing, gathering them into her heart, pondering them, we see the prototype of sainthood. A saint is someone who says yes to God no matter the cost. And a saint is someone who, when things happen that don't make sense, rather than shaking their fist at God, or stamping their foot in anger, they gather them into their heart and wrestle with them in the presence of God, expecting that in due time God will make them clear. We ought to imitate her the same way that we ought to imitate all the saints who have gone before us. But Mary is, I think, fairly the greatest of the saints. Now, what must Anglicans believe about Mary? First, we must believe that she is the Theotokos. Don't get thrown off by an old Greek word. It means the bearer of God. And the term itself is ancient from the early church. In the Council of Ephesus in 431 AD, you see this term, that she is the Theotokos. And the idea behind it is that Jesus Christ, from the moment of conception, was both divine and human. And so that from the very moment of conception, Mary had God in her womb. She bore God. If we actually deny that she was the bearer of God, what we're actually saying is that there was a moment when Jesus wasn't divine. And so we must confess that she was the Theotokos, the bearer of God. We must also confess that she was a virgin at the birth of Christ. This comes from the Gospel of Luke. Now we move to the category of what are Anglicans permitted but not compelled to believe. The first of these is her perpetual virginity, the idea that she was a virgin until the day of her death. This was an ordinary belief in the early church until the Reformation. Everybody believed it pretty much. Even now, the Eastern Orthodox believe it. The Roman Catholics believe it. The 2 largest branches, by the way, of Christianity in the world. It's ordinary belief in Lutheranism and in Anglicanism. The idea that she never again had any other children, that she was a perpetual virgin. You may say, why would she have done this? And the basic idea behind it is this Jewish concept of consecration, that she'd been devoted to God, that she was sort of a living holy of holies, that she had borne God in her, and that no one had the right to come into that space. This idea would mean that Joseph was a sort of Levite who guarded a tabernacle of the Lord, who preserved her, but that she was God's and God's alone. A very Jewish idea that she was devoted to God. You may say, well, what about the brothers of Jesus? It may surprise you. The New Testament actually never calls them the children of Mary. They're only the brothers of Jesus. And you may say, well, wouldn't that mean that they're the children of Mary? And the answer is no, not necessarily. In fact, in the early church, the belief about James was that he was the older half-brother, that he'd been a child of Joseph from a previous marriage, that Joseph was a widower, and that he was not the child of Mary. You may say, well, what about the others? And the basic answer to that question was, in a tribal society, the word brother was used very loosely, and they may have been cousins or something like that. Another doctrine that Anglicans are permitted but not compelled to believe is in the bodily assumption of Mary. The idea that she was lifted directly into heaven like Enoch or Elijah and was spared the pains of death because of her faithfulness. It's not been a widespread belief in the church, but you see it as early as the 400s AD, Christians believing this. We're not forced to believe it, but we certainly can without hurting the scriptures in any way. One thing that Anglicans don't believe about Mary, and that is the Roman Catholic dogma of the Immaculate Conception. Now, the dogma of the Immaculate Conception says that Mary, by the grace of God, was spared the stain of original sin so that she would be a fitting vessel for the Lord. And you can understand, on the one hand, the impulse for it, that you would want the Mother of God to be perfect. The Eastern Orthodox actually reject that dogma, and the reason why they reject it is because that very dogma nullifies her sainthood. Think about it for a second. Her sainthood is based on her willing yes to God. The fact that she is offering herself to God. And if instead of offering herself, she was spared from any sort of misstep by God's grace, she becomes not a willing saint, but instead almost a sort of robot. And so the Eastern Orthodox reject that dogma because it nullifies her sainthood. The other reason why Anglicans reject it is because it nullifies her own need of redemption if she's spared the stain of original sin. There's also a couple of titles that are used mainly in the Roman Catholic Church that Anglicans don't use. They call her the co-redemptrix, the idea that she has a sort of subordinate role to Christ in the redemption of the world. The Eastern Orthodox also reject that title, saying that Christ is the only Redeemer of the world. She's called in the Roman Catholic Church a mediatrix, sort of a sub-mediator for Christ. The Hail Mary, that prayer, assumes that role, and that title is also rejected in the Anglican Church. I mean, all Christians are called to mediate for one another, to pray for one another, but the belief that Mary has a special and unique role in mediating for the world is one that was rejected by the Anglicans. The title, the Queen of Heaven, is one that's also rejected because it sort of displaces the church as the bride of Christ. The church is the Queen of Heaven. The church is the bride of Christ. But we need to recognize, though, that Mary is the prototype of the church. She's the example of the church. She looks like what the church ought to look like, saying yes to God fully, bearing Christ in her till Christ is formed. This happens in the whole church, happens in each of us, Christ formed in us. Bringing Christ to the world, she does it literally. We're supposed to do it in a spiritual manner. And so even though we wouldn't call her the Queen of Heaven because that's sort of a title that makes more sense for the church, she is an example or type of the church. Hope these answers have helped and not confused. Thank you for watching this edition of Ask the Church. As always, if you have more questions, send them to stephenbreedlove@incarnationrichmond.org. Thanks for watching, and go in the grace of our Lord.